Clip Notes is live. If you can't listen to the show, but you want to know who was on the show and what was said, you can sign up for Clip Notes. You get a 1-paragraph summary, key moments in bullet point format, and timestamps so that you can go straight to that point in the episode, and 1 to 4 video clips from the show. Stay current, share insights with your team, and maintain your commitment to their development during these extraordinary times. Sign up by sending an email to clipnotes, CLIPNOTES, at thisweekinhealthit.com. Stay current and keep your team current. Welcome to This Week in Health IT. It's Tuesday News Day, where we look at the news which will impact health IT. Today, Epic takes heat from employees and adjusts their course. HIMSS announces new dates, patient ID, chaos in compliance, and telehealth is here to stay, I think. My name is Bill Russell, healthcare CIO, coach, and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcast videos and collaboration events dedicated to developing the next generation of health leaders. This episode and every episode since we started the COVID-19 series has been sponsored by Sirius Healthcare. Now we're exiting the series, and Sirius has stepped up to be a weekly sponsor of the show through the end of the year. Special thanks to Sirius for supporting the show's efforts during the crisis and beyond. If you haven't signed up for 3X Drex yet, you are missing out. Text Drex, D-R-E-X, to 484848 and receive 3 texts every week with stories that will help you to stay current. It helps me prepare for the show. This is a service of Drex to Ford, a frequent contributor of the show. Now, on to the news. I want to do something in the first 10 minutes of the show before I jump to the news that I haven't done before. I'm going to go through the headlines in modern healthcare and just riff a little off the headlines themselves, just trying something out to see how it goes. And then we'll jump into the stories that I have selected. So, this idea came because I was just shocked. I'm sitting here looking at the modern healthcare website. And by the way, all this stuff is behind a paywall. Unless you work for a health system, in which case just walk around, you'll find a copy of Modern Healthcare sitting around somewhere. There were so many great headlines that I thought it would be interesting just to riff. Now, I haven't read these stories. I am just going off the headline. Okay, so cut me a little slack here. I'm trying something new. The first story here is Kaiser Permanente posts $4.5 billion in Q2 net income. A couple things jump out at me with this. One of the things we did when I was a CIO is we created a thing called IT University. And part of the IT University was we had people from my team, and my direct reports and myself, each had to lead a class. So we had to teach a class, had to be at least 4 hours in duration. And the CFO for my group decided to teach a class on understanding healthcare finance and understanding how to create a budget for within health IT. And it was interesting when he created the class. It was a really well attended and received class, as you can imagine. A lot of people don't understand healthcare finance and how healthcare organizations make money, and all the money they give to public good and how they all those things. So that was an interesting conversation in and of itself. But he covered a lot of things like operating income and what that means and how we look at those things. And we looked at, I don't think the word is endowments, but the investments that healthcare organizations have. And when I'm reading this headline, the first thing that pops out at me is Kaiser posted a $4.5 billion net income in Q2. Okay, so the first thing you have to ask is how much of that is operating income? And I don't know, I haven't read the story, but I would imagine a fair amount of that's operating income. They probably used the crisis as an opportunity to reduce costs. So they probably had a percentage or two drop in costs. They had an increase in revenue because Kaiser is a payer and a provider. So anytime somebody tries to compare your health system with Kaiser, you have to ask how much of the percentage of your overall business is as a payer, right? So that's not always a good comparison. So the reason I look at this story is to say, understand what you're reading when you read these things. Understand the comparisons that are being made, because you could just go down on this same page down to the bottom here, and it says Mass General Brigham reports 12% loss in margin amid patient care drought. And so you have to look at the timelines, and you have to look at what they're actually talking about. The first was talking about net income. The bottom one's talking about a margin drop. And margin drops happen when profitable business, when you're doing less profitable business and some of your profitable business has dropped out. So when we stopped doing elective procedures, that was very profitable business. And we started doing more COVID, that maybe wasn't as profitable of a type of business. So I cover that to say, as healthcare IT leaders within the organization, part of our job is to help our organization and our people to understand the finance of healthcare, the finance of healthcare IT, where the money's coming from, and how that money should get allocated to drive what's best for the community, not only best for the community, but also is good for the business to keep it going. Okay, next story was 9 healthcare policies at stake if Congress COVID-19 package stalls. I am actually going to pull this up just to see what the 9 are. More provider relief fund money could be at risk, relaxing Medicare loan terms, liability protections, telehealth policy extension, COVID-19 testing funds, state and local funding. It's interesting as I read that article, as I just hit those headlines real quick. This is an alarmist article. How I read this is, first of all, there is going to be something passed, right? So this is one of those things that you ratchet up the pressure by writing these kind of articles, getting people concerned about things so that they push this thing forward. And that's generally speaking how I read this article. First of all, I think telehealth is going to continue. I think this package is going to pass. We're not going to have to worry about additional funding coming down to hospitals. They're the largest employers in all these states. There's an election going on. No party wants to tick off the electorate during an election. So that's how I read that. Let's see. Epic Systems makes return to in-person work voluntary. I'm going to come back to that story because it's actually one of the stories we're covering. Because when I picked the stories, it was that the Epic employees had responded unfavorably. The reason I pulled that article out is because I think we're all going to have to face that. How are we going to bring our employees back? Is it going to be a voluntary thing? Is it not going to be a voluntary thing? And what are we going to do when people just refuse to come back? And so I want to talk about that a little bit in the so what in that story when we take a look at it. I'm not taking a look at it to say, hey, Epic did this right or this wrong. I'm really looking at it to say, what can we learn from that? Because we're going to have to do something similar in the not too distant future. Then there's, of course, Trump orders to defund Medicare. Social Security encroaches on Congress's power to invite challenges. Again, another one of those stories that's written mostly to agitate people and get them excited. For the most part, the executive order that he signed doesn't really do much. I think if you read into it, it authorizes people to go in directions, but it doesn't, in and of itself, doesn't appear to do much from what I'm reading. But it does do what it is intended to do, which it takes the ground away from the opponents so that they are forced to the negotiating table, and it moves it forward in a little fashion. And at least that's the political maneuvering that's going on. Again, not a political show. I'm not commenting on it. I'm just saying that's how I read this. As a CIO, I'm sort of reading this going, hey, there's really nothing I need to worry about here, because this is going to play out like all of these things play out, which is eventually there's enough pressure, a deal gets done, and all that stuff gets taken care of. The funding, the telehealth, and all that other stuff gets taken care of. So there's nothing for me to really function from. I can get agitated by these stories because that's why they're written, but it doesn't really do anyone any good. I think there's 2 stories here that are really fascinating and relevant for us. One is emergency department visits continue to lag post-COVID, right? I'm just reading the article. This is not surprising to me. We did a good job of moving. I've said this before. We did a good job of telling people, hey, stop coming into the emergency department because we need to do social distancing and we need to create a safe environment. Well, we went ahead and created those safe environments, and now people aren't coming back because people generally are still making a lot of decisions out of fear. And so it's our job to help them to overcome that fear, but we have to present the compelling case. Why should they come back to the emergency department? And a lot of them are choosing to use telehealth, which is good, right? And a lot of them are trying to use different avenues to get care, which is interesting because the very next article is Rethinking ED waiting rooms in response to COVID-19. And I think that is where we need to go. This is a very relevant conversation for healthcare and healthcare IT. right? Emergency department visits continue to lag, and rethinking the ED waiting rooms in response to COVID-19. I don't sit in a waiting room now to get my hair cut. Why would I sit in a waiting room full of sick people to go see a doctor? Right. We've changed how people think about waiting rooms, and we need to think about how we have designed our hospitals and maybe how we have to redesign our hospitals. I know for me, going to get my haircut, I make an appointment. I show up, I stay outside. They come out and get me. I go in, get my haircut with a mask on and the whole thing. And I get out of there. I think I'm out of there in 15 minutes. So I'm only exposed to somebody else for like 15 minutes. It doesn't reduce my risk down to zero, but I use that story to say there is probably an opportunity for us to sit down and rethink waiting rooms, and technology will have a role in that for sure. Let's see. Healthcare industry forged new supply chains in the fight against COVID-19. There's definitely a technology play there. Next story, I see how Mercy Hospital's closure could hobble Chicago's South Side healthcare. Roughly 300 fewer beds on Chicago's South Side, where residents have long been disproportionately affected by chronic conditions and now COVID-19. We're going to continue this is one of the things we expected out of COVID, that if you did not have a well-funded hospital, if you did not have a hospital that was potentially well-funded and operating at a high efficiency, that those hospitals were going to be hobbled so much that they may not recover. And we're starting to see that. And so there are going to be gaps that are created in certain areas, rural areas, some, as they say, disproportionately affected areas. And that is going to be something that needs to be addressed, something that from a health IT perspective, I read that and I say, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of these. And if I'm with a larger health system, I'm thinking, there's going to be a bunch of expansion that we're going to do, either to fill these gaps or through M&A that is going to be coming down the pike. That's how I read that story. Let's see. Blue Cross claims returning to pre-COVID-19 levels. That's not surprising to me. We saw the claims data bounce back to about 85%. That was back in April, May. We saw it back at 85%. It doesn't surprise me that it's almost back up to 100%. Here's an interesting health IT story. VA resumes rollout of $16 billion Cerner EHR project. I don't think there's any project in the country that has more scrutiny than this project in terms of an EHR rollout. And it's going to have, again, it's $16 billion in its implementation. So it has a lot of interests. Let's say it that way. There's a lot of interests fighting around this. And there are some that would like to see it fail so that it might go to a different EHR vendor. There are, there's ways to make political points by pointing out some of the deficiencies and things that are going on. So again, if I were the CIO for this project, this is an extremely challenging project. I would, I would cross my T's, dot my I's. I would make sure that we were doing, piloted projects, ensure minimizing the risk, and make sure that goes well. So that's this is the first time I'm trying this. I think it's, I think it's interesting. You guys can tell me, Bill at thisweekinhealthit.com. Is it interesting? Is it not interesting? We will find out. All right. So we are taking a look at a bunch of stories this week that have come down the pike. Let's start with the Epic story, right? So you want to hear about that. Epic faces employee backlash. This is healthcare IT news. And because we only report out on Tuesday, this was from last week, and it said essentially that frustrated staffers at the Verona campus allege indifference from upper management to the health risks and say there have been efforts to quash dissent. Some say they're looking to unionize in response. Okay, so Epic CEO Judy Faulkner wrote in a July company-wide email, "It's hard, actually, it's impossible to retain our culture when we are working from our homes." She added, creativity, innovation, and serendipity suffer, which can be fatal to a company like ours that is constantly needing to create new products and new features. But employees are wary of returning to work in Wisconsin, where the coronavirus spread is currently described as uncontrolled, according to a COVID-19 exit strategy with 6.1 positivity rate. And then it goes on to talk about the World Health Organization, a couple other things. And so letting people work from home during the pandemic is a one-sided trade-off. The company loses almost nothing. Culture hardly counts and gains quite a bit in the way that the employee goodwill, morale, and public health, wrote another. So these are employee responses. So they're saying, hey, look, the company gains so much because we are such happier employees, and there's no downside because we're just as productive as we were. Another one wrote, the response to COVID-19 has been a disaster. Management doesn't care about the safety and well-being of the employees during the pandemic. Another one said, slow to roll out working from home when COVID-19 pandemic started, then rushing to get 9,000 people back on campus despite high success for working from home, wrote another. Instead of fearing work from home, learn to manage when your employees aren't on campus. They were your strongest assets, but are now leaving. Well, I doubt they're leaving, but a lot of times, again, this is at the peak, right? So when you read these things, it's the emotions are at their peak, and management's trying to posture, and employees are trying to posture. So yeah, I guess I'm morally outraged at our response when an anonymous Epic employee said on CBS News, "I don't want us to be the epicenter of the next breakout." Again, these concerns are not unfounded. I mean, my baseball team, the St. Louis Cardinals, and, we can point fingers and say, oh, they didn't follow protocol, whatever. We have no idea if they followed protocol or not. This virus is not a Democrat or Republican. This virus is not a Midwestern or big city. This virus is not rural or urban. It's not this virus. It's not National League or American League. It doesn't root for the Cubs and not for the Cardinals. This virus is a virus, and it acts like a virus. And so it doesn't matter if your intentions are good or bad. It will act like a virus. And, it's interesting to read all these things. So anyway, we should probably go to the other story. And the other story is Epic responded, hopefully in the right way. So let's take a look at this. Epic Systems makes return to in-person work voluntary. And this is what a lot of you are doing, right? Epic employs about 10,000 people. 4,200 have already returned to work last week. So let me comment on that. That seems to be the approach that a lot of people are using. People that choose to return to work may choose to return to work. By the way, Epic's facility is probably one of the safest facilities in the country to work in. I mean, Judy Faulkner went out of her way to make it's a interesting place, but it has HEPA filters, almost all individual offices, plenty of space. It's a wide open facility. You could practice social distancing. You could wear a mask. It's probably one of the safest facilities out there, right? But it's still, how is it going to be perceived by your employees? Make them come back, voluntarily come back. I think this is a different conversation if vaccines in place, herd immunity has happened. I think this is a case study for us in healthcare to say, how are we going to bring our employees back? There will be a time where we sit back and go, look, we've now done the real analysis, not this, hey, we're doing a good job working from home, but we've actually done the analysis to say, have we lost anything? And if we haven't lost anything, then by all means, employees work from home, everybody's happy. But if we've lost some things, let's have that discussion and say, how do we bring people back? What do the hybrid models look like? This is going to be a conversation I'm looking forward to having in the fall with CIOs as I have them on the show. And just to say, how are we thinking about this? How are we bringing them back? My so what on this is right now the ball's in the employees' court. I don't think we should force them to do anything. I don't think we have answers to an awful lot of things. We don't have enough testing still in some cases. I know that the Cardinals, again, I'm following that because I'm a huge St. Louis Cardinals fan. And one of the things I'm seeing is they're literally taking tests every day to try to get back on the field. And I don't think we can offer that level of, are we going to do that level of testing? If there is a breakout, are we going to do contact tracing to ensure that the people who were at work are monitored in the right way? And so this is going to be a conversation. If you're planning on coming on the show this fall, and some of you have accepted the invitations, and I'm looking forward to it, this is going to be one of those topics I think people want to hear about. All right, next story. Let's go to patient ID. So, good news. The House voted to remove the federal ban on the unique patient identifier. It's good news because HIMSS has been pushing this, CHIME has been pushing this, and they're not the only ones. There's others who have been pushing this. I seem to be the only one in the opposite camp, by the way. But generally speaking, this story says that they've removed the block to funding anything around this. So there used to be a block in some bill, Section 510 of Labor HHS bill, prohibiting federal funds for the promulgation or adoption of a unique patient identifier. Love those words. And so you had bipartisan support on this. It was supported, as I said, it's supported by HIMSS, supported by CHIME, supported by others. Just real briefly, why am I not a huge proponent of this? There's a handful of reasons. One is we even solved this within our four walls of our health system. There's still, in many health systems, there's still a 2 to something percent, 2 to 2+% duplicate rates. Now, some of the well-run hospitals have gotten that percentage way, way down. And the reason is because it's a people problem, right? It's not necessarily a technology problem, although technology helps. We used Initiate, and there's other technologies that are out there that allow you to put alerts up as people are checking in. We also had a significant population of people that were, what do you call them, aliases, I guess, that people weren't giving us their real information. So you're bound to have duplicates and other kinds of information like that. We also had a different EHR for our ambulatory and our acute that also led to duplicates. And so when I say that, I say, we haven't solved the problem within, and we had the ability to do all sorts of things, and it didn't really solve it. So I'm not sure that a patient identifier on a national basis is going to give us the ability to pull everything in. That's number one. Number two, we have let's just call it the ACLU concerns. And the ACLU concerns are that there could be a breach of patient privacy that they are concerned about. The third, I would say, is security. And from a security standpoint, if I have the ability to go into let's say a weak cybersecurity posture health system and get in there and then link up to the other records and get a complete medical record from that, let's just say vulnerable health system, we have not proved our ability to keep breaches from happening. And now we've given a sophisticated hacker a way to piece together the entire medical record from across the board. So, that's another reason I'm not a huge fan. And then actually my primary reason, all those things are really secondary to me, but the primary reason I'm not a fan is I believe that the patient identifier should be, I think the patient should be the center of the identifier. So it should be a patient-centric data sharing model, not a hospital-centric data sharing model, and not a health system-centric data sharing model. And so I've talked about this on the show before, so I won't go into too much detail, but suffice it to say, I'm more of a fan of having my phone number be my unique patient identifier, and the record comes to me, and I'm the data steward, and I can find fiduciaries, I can find data stewards, I can find others who are going to help me in my healthcare. This is a very healthcare-centric way of thinking about this problem and really pursuing a solution to this problem. So that's my 2 cents on this. What's the so what for you? The so what for you is this is probably going to be the direction that we go. Unique patient identifier. Just keep an eye on it. It's going to move slow. All they did was lift the funding ban. It's going to open up funding. It's still going to take them. I don't know. It'll take probably a couple years before we're really doing anything in health IT. That's my 2 cents on it. I hope it moves faster, and I hope it gets us to a an accurate longitudinal patient record at the point of care. That's their goal. I believe that their intentions are good, and I believe that their goal is noble, and I hope we get there. I'm an advocate for a different approach. So neither here nor there on that one. Let's see. What else did I say I was going to talk about? Patient ID, chaos in compliance. This is an interesting story. Quick pivot to new HHS COVID-19 reporting rules meant chaos for hospitals. Generally, I read this article. I wasn't a huge fan of the article. And the reason I wasn't a huge fan is because the hospital associations and whatnot speak for health IT, and they make us sound like the Keystone Cops. The reality is, while this pivot, if you don't remember, the CDC, oh, well, you're living it. So the CDC, we used to send our reports either to the state or to the CDC directly, and now HHS is now the target. They added about six to eight data fields out of 31. I think it's 90 some odd data elements that we have to collect. But the data elements really fall into two categories. They fall into the basic blocking and tackling of healthcare. These are things that we had reports and dashboards on for decades, literally. I mean, we know how many beds we have. We know who's in the beds. The challenge with some of this stuff is it's in multiple systems, right? It's not just, hey, go to your EHR, run a report, and here we go. Some of it's in teletracking. Some of it's spread out. It can be in your pharmacy system. That might be in your EHR. It might not be in your EHR. So there is some work here to get the extracts right. And so my so what on this is, yeah, there is some work here, but they make it sound like it's an impossible lift. The reality is the first 25 some odd data fields should be a relatively easy lift because we lifted it a decade ago, right? It's the new data fields that probably need a little bit of time to get right. And so there's two ways to report this, either directly to HHS or to the state. And what I'm advocating for you, if you're doing this, is take the time, get it right, send it in. But also don't stand behind these hospital associations that are calling this out. Don't stand behind, oh, it's too hard, it's impossible. If that's the case, then we really have significant analytics problems within our organizations. I understand we have to stand up some new things for some of these new data fields that we're collecting, but all in all, this should be a core competency for every health system, the ability to pull fields, even new fields that they're asking us for, to validate those fields, to get the extract right, and to create the feed that goes out. If I were a governor, I don't know if I have any governors listening to this or anybody in government, that should be the method for everyone to report. It shouldn't be directly to the HHS. It should be to report through the state governments. And the reason I say that is because if I'm a governor, I want this information. I don't want it to go through HHS and then come back to me. I want it at the state so that I can build the right responses. We're responding locally to this, right? So I need as much data as I can get. It doesn't make sense for me to have it go to HHS. Now, I understand it's underfunded. A lot of public health is underfunded in most states, but there should be a repository. And if you are struggling to set that up, by all means, give me a call. There's a lot of ways you can set up that repository in a open source platform that is not overly expensive. A lot of health systems have done it in the past, build your own kind of thing, very inexpensive. Take in those data feeds and massage that data and get it right, and then send it over to HHS. So that's the so what. So what if you're a state? Get the data to yourself. If you're a health system, don't stand behind it's too hard, because it's not too hard. This is basic blocking and tackling in analytics. Get the extract, get it right. Take the time. If it takes a week and you're not reporting on time and those guys, take your time, get it right, because you don't want to report incorrect information, because you're just going to have to go back and correct it anyway. So get it right, but then send it over. Again, this is what we do. This is our business. It's IT, information technologies, moving information around, and this is what they expect from us. Let's see, one more story. That's chaos and compliance. What did I say? Oh, HIMSS announces new dates. I don't know if I want to talk about this one. This is an interesting hot potato, and I've seen some posts out on social media on this. The question people are asking is there a better way to do this? Right? I remember the first time I went to HIMSS and I said to somebody, is this a big deal? And they said, no, it's not a big deal. Then I went and there's like a bajillion people there. And I'm like, how could you say this isn't a big deal? There's so many people here. And their point was that not a whole heck of a lot gets done there. I don't think that analysis was true. I've been able to utilize HIMSS pretty effectively to to meet with vendors. They're all in one place. I got a lot of, as a CIO, one of the things that happens is you start to elevate above the technology, start to work with the business more, but you start to get away from the technology. And one of the things that enabled me to do, as a CIO, I liked walking the floor. I could get a lot of demos very quickly, so I could see what my EHR provider was doing. I could see what other EHR providers were doing in a very low-key way. I was able to see what was going on between VMware and Citrix. I was able to see what was going on in identity and access management and look at the different solutions around that. I was able to sit in. I didn't sit in on a lot of the presentations, to be honest with you. I would have liked to have done more. But for a CIO, that was there was value in all the vendor partners coming together and having the Chime event sort of connected with it. I don't think this is going to go away. There's a lot of bad taste in how HIMSS handled this. They're holding on to the money they do have. They have not given refunds the way they should. They're essentially saying, hey, we're waiting to see how our insurance claim comes through before we give any kind of money back. And I've heard from vendors that they're not overly happy. I've heard from some health systems. There's some different things that people signed up for that they didn't get money back for. There's a lot of bad blood around this, but I don't suspect. I think HIMSS is going to take a black eye. I think the August date will not be overly well attended for a couple of reasons. One is August. I don't know. I don't know where we'll be in August. I don't know what it'll look like. I do know that budgets will still be constrained, so travel will still be constrained. So it'll be tight from that perspective. I think there's going to be some bad blood. There's going to be some empty booths for that reason. But here's my so what. If there's value, there's value. So if I were a CIO and, I'd probably go to that August conference to take a look, see if there's value. There's still the networking opportunity with your peers. There's still an opportunity to meet with strategic vendors because you can rest assured that your EHR vendor will be there, and some of the key players, whether they're angry or not, is going to be irregardless. They're going to be going next year just to see what sort of transpires. Others are going to see this as an opportunity to step up and say, hey, our conference is the next conference. To be honest with you, I've gone to a lot of these conferences. There's none quite like this one. There's none quite like HIMSS. I've gone to the health conference. It's a different crowd. It's the innovation crowd, and it's mostly around venture capital. It's mostly around private equity. It's mostly around investments and that whole crowd. And it's not the same. Now I think you'll see those vendors start to show up there, and that might be the protest vote. The protest vote might be the health conference, but again, it's a very different conference. So we'll have to see. I don't have a definitive. I'm not falling down either side of this. I do remember the quote from Hunt for Red October. Ramius, the commander of the Soviet sub, at the end, the Alec Baldwin character, Jack Ryan, is essentially saying, hey, there's going to be hell to pay in Russia for the ship going down. And he looks at him and says, a little revolution from time to time is a good thing. And, healthcare revolution from time to time might be a good thing. Well, that's all for this week. Don't forget to sign up for Clip Notes, send an email, hit the website. We want to make sure that your system is more productive, and Clip Notes is one of the ways that we're trying to do that. Special thanks to our sponsors, VMware, Starburst Advisors, Galen Healthcare, Health Lyrics, Sirius Healthcare, Pro Talent Advisors, and Health Next, for choosing to invest in developing the next generation of health leaders. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out our website, thisweekhealth.com, or the YouTube channel. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to share it with a peer. Send an email, let them know that you find value in the show. Please check back every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday as we continue to drop shows. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.